The Transformation of Things is an exhibition by myself and 3 other artists exploring the nature of language and the changing and evolving iconographies found within Chinese visual culture by tracing visual etymology from east to west. The transformation of things is a sort of an overarching concept that I've been working on in my practice through a number of years and different iterations in different ways. And when I was approached to do this project, it was something that was still present, something I was dealing with within my work and exploring within my work. And I wanted to take that further. And the way that I felt that I could take that further when I was approached with this particular project is by working with these 3 new artists, looking at their sort of practices and the kind of imagery that they were building as their own sort of visual vocabularies and responding with my own sort of language. What was fascinating to me was that they're each working in such unique mediums, calligraphy, ceramics, and watercolor. And they were all classically trained in a traditional way, and I was interested in seeing how those traditional mediums would dialogue with my own work, my own iconographies in a contemporary way, and just seeing what kind of connections or disconnections there might be. So I think the thing that links them all together is this idea of language, whether it's the written word with calligraphy and how that starts with pictograms and how it evolved into something else, something more gestural and expressive, much like painting. Going into these traditional paintings with Winifred Lee's and just working from nature and being totally spontaneous in the moment and working in that way and developing those kinds of iconographies and how those have changed in the time, changing context of time and place. And in ceramics and the objects and how those are painted, and how each of these mediums has their own unique stylistic iconographies that have something, each of them has something unique to say and has provokes a unique response within my own practice and my own work and how I was looking at those. Part of that conversation about working within our historical context and trying to add something new to that conversation, it's quite an old conversation. The painting behind me, for example, Zhuangzi, Dreams, is a philosophy that was born from an experience that happened 300 years BC. So if you can imagine, it was such a seminal moment in Chinese culture that painters have been depicting that moment for a couple of thousand years. So again, it's like, how do I add something new to that conversation? So there's a bit of a way to the history there. But in a contemporary sense, in a more recent sense, this idea of East and West, blending this idea of Eastern and Western visual languages, I think it comes initially from first chinoiserie, when China opened up to the West. All this arts and crafts came over and started influencing the Europeans, and then more particularly Japanisme coming in, and I think that really directly led to the development of modernism and the flattening out of the landscape in a romanticist way. And I think that in turn influenced the Group of Seven, and Tom Thompson, those kinds of artists, and their attempt at creating a unique cultural identity via the Canadian landscape. And so I see myself and my work as an evolution and a continuation of that sort of art history. I like to work predominantly from memory because I think it reflects the hybridic nature of working with the real and the imagined. Whatever I don't recall accurately, I'll just invent and imagine. But that's not to say that I don't sometimes need a point of reference. For me, it's really about treading that fine line between the real and imagined, to have that suspension of disbelief, to really reflect this idea that the outer objective realm and the inner subjective realm are part of one and the same experience, and that things are subjective. we use elements of the landscape and space to construct how we situate ourselves within our own mind psychologically, but we also project ourselves out into the landscape. If we see a face in a tree walking in the woods, we're making sense. We're ordering that chaos into something recognizable. So it's important that I tread that fine line. Sometimes I work predominantly from memory, but sometimes I need those points of reference too. As far as process goes, I'll start with a general idea, and I'll just go from there, and I'll dialogue with the canvas as the painting as I'm making it, whether it's by creating a texture or a ground where it's creating that chaos in which to start pulling the figure out of and to start hinging my idea around. Or if it's about building it around a particular form or animal or text. The way in which this started as reading about a Chinese landscape painting, and the writer was describing the mountain range, like the twisting back of a dragon, or there's 3 rocks by a bend in a river, like 3 old men playing chess. And I had this sort of aha moment where I could build these landscapes around these very deliberate forms as a way to have the work not overly determinatory. So you just don't know what's going to happen when you're making it. So say with a hidden hunger, the whole landscape is built around this form of a tiger descending a mountain, which speaks about a very particular kind of iconography and a rebus, and it has very certain meaning. But at the same time, as a compositional device, it allows for a more dynamic way of working, and you just never know what the landscape itself is going to look like in the end. So in Chinese iconography, there's these rebuses. There are rebuses, and rebuses are these visual puzzles where each thing or object or plant or animal can mean something very specific, and when you start combining them, they can have quite elaborate meanings. And it's really fascinating. It's like a bit of a rabbit hole if you start reading all about them, and you're like, you can do this and talk about this or that, and you can go so far in that ultimately only you know what it's about, which I think, throughout our history, I think is quite common. I think there's a European tradition where it's that, particularly with Dutch painting. Certain flowers will represent different things, certain insects, different times of the year and different seasons. These all have these rich sort of symbolic iconographic meanings, and it's no less so in Chinese art history. So for me, like the compositional devices of building landscapes around text or animal forms, it's an impetus, or creating that texture, that chaotic texture to then work off of. It's just an impetus. It's just a starting point. And then wherever the work goes from there is, again, it's that element of discovery in the making of the work. And in the same way that I don't want work to be overly determinatory for my own self, I like to have that element of discovery within the making of the work. So I would like to have the viewer to also have that element of discovery within the work, whether they see the form of a tiger out of negative space, or a form out of positive space, or seeing hidden things built within, or learning about what each thing represents or means, or when you put them all together, again, with else, taking it further and further. And I think that in this particular context of working with Eastern iconographies in a Western way, there will definitely be some things that are lost in translation, but there might be other things that are gained as well.